In roughly 60 seconds, multiple precision strikes hit key buildings inside one of the most heavily guarded government complexes in the country. And when the smoke cleared, a large portion of Iran's top political and military leadership was reportedly gone. Not after days of fighting, not after a long war. 1 minute. What stunned many military analysts wasn't only the scale of the strike, it was how it was prepared. According to several investigative reports and intelligence leaks, this operation didn't start with fighter jets or bombs. It started with data, satellite imagery, movement patterns, daily routines, and in some cases, even something as strange as garbage trucks leaving a government compound. It sounds ridiculous at first, but when you think about it, the amount of food delivered to a building, the number of vehicles entering and leaving, or even the weight of trash coming out can reveal something important. How many people are inside? When those tiny pieces of information are collected over months and analyzed together, they start forming a very detailed picture. And that's exactly what intelligence analysts were trying to build. A map of how Iran's leadership actually lived and worked day to day. Because Tehran isn't an easy place to infiltrate. For decades, the country has treated American and Israeli intelligence as hostile adversaries. The capital is heavily guarded by layers of security, including the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Sending human spies deep into the leadership circle would be incredibly risky. So instead, the operation relied on something far more modern. Data surveillance. Advanced satellites monitored heat signatures across key government buildings. Analysts could see which structures were active, which floors had people gathering, and when unusual activity appeared. If one building suddenly produced much more heat than usual, it might mean a meeting was happening. But the really surprising details came from everyday logistics. Food deliveries, vehicle traffic, supply shipments, and yes, even trash collection. Over time, these data points revealed a pattern. At night, Iran's top leader was extremely cautious. He often stayed inside secure underground locations or moved between protected shelters. That meant if an attack happened at night, there was a high chance the target wouldn't even be there. But during the day, things were different. Daytime was when many high-ranking officials would leave their secure locations and attend meetings across government facilities. And eventually, after months of watching and analyzing these patterns, something unusual appeared in the data. A rare moment when multiple powerful figures inside Iran's leadership structure were scheduled to be inside the same government complex in Tehran. For intelligence planners who had been waiting for an opportunity like this, it was the moment they had been preparing for. But here's the twist. Most military operations like this are carried out at night, when darkness hides aircraft and reduces the chance of detection. This one wouldn't be. The planners made a decision that surprised even some military experts. They were going to strike in broad daylight. But before that could happen, there was one critical problem they had to solve first. They had to make sure that, for a brief moment, Iran's entire air defense system would be blind. To understand how a strike like this could even be possible, you have to look at the months leading up to it. Because the airstrike itself, the part with the planes and the explosions, was actually the final step of a much longer process. The real story starts with intelligence. For months, American and Israeli intelligence agencies were quietly building what some analysts later described as a massive surveillance web around Iran's leadership structure. Their goal wasn't just to track one person. It was to understand the entire ecosystem of power, who met with whom, where those meetings happened, and more importantly, when the most important figures were in the same place at the same time. And that's much harder than it sounds. Iran's top officials rarely gather together in a single location. In fact, they actively avoid it. It's a basic rule of survival in geopolitics. Never allow your entire leadership circle to become a single target. So most of the time, these officials operate in different buildings, different compounds, sometimes even different cities. Which means if someone wanted to strike them all at once, they'd need something extremely rare. A moment when those safety habits break. That's why intelligence analysts started watching patterns instead of individuals. Using advanced surveillance satellites, they monitored the main government complex in Tehran, the area that houses the offices of the supreme leader, presidential buildings, and several national security agencies. But these satellites weren't just taking pictures. They were measuring heat signatures. Heat data can reveal a lot. If a building suddenly shows a large increase in thermal activity, It often means more people are inside, more lights on, more equipment running, more human bodies producing heat. By watching these patterns day after day, analysts could start guessing when meetings were taking place. But the analysis didn't stop there. Logistics became another source of clues. Food shipments were tracked. If a larger than usual supply delivery arrived, it could suggest that more people were expected inside the compound. Vehicle traffic was also monitored. Certain government vehicles moving through security checkpoints could signal that high-ranking officials were arriving. And then there was something that sounds almost absurd: trash analysis. When garbage trucks left the compound, intelligence analysts could estimate the weight of the waste being transported. A heavier load could indicate a larger number of people working or gathering in the area that day. Individually, each of these details might seem meaningless, but together, they created something powerful: a behavioral pattern. And that pattern revealed something important. Iran's leadership had one consistent habit. They almost never gathered in the same place at night. Nighttime was when security paranoia peaked. Leaders stayed deep inside protected shelters or underground bunkers. But daytime was different. During the day, meetings happened. Officials moved between offices. Planning sessions took place, which meant that if someone wanted to strike multiple leadership targets at once, daytime was the only real opportunity. And eventually, after months of watching this system of patterns and movements, the analysts noticed something unusual on the calendar. A Saturday morning. In Iran, Saturday is the first working day of the week, not Monday like in the United States. And at that time of year, the country was also in the middle of Ramadan, a period when morning meetings among senior officials were common before the day's fasting routines began. The data suggested that several top figures inside Iran's political and military hierarchy would be inside the same government complex that morning. Not the same room, but close enough. For intelligence planners, this was exactly the kind of moment they had been waiting for. But even with the perfect opportunity, there was still a huge problem. Tehran is protected by layers of radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, and early warning networks. Before any bomber could even get close to the target, those defenses had to be neutralized. And that meant the operation would begin with something very different from the final strike. It would begin with a sudden attempt to blind an entire country's air defense network. Even with the perfect moment identified, there was still a massive obstacle standing between the plan and reality. Iran's air defenses. Tehran isn't just any city. It's one of the most heavily defended capitals in the Middle East. Layers of radar systems, missile batteries, and early warning networks are designed to detect incoming aircraft long before they ever get close to the city. In other words, if fighter jets simply flew straight toward Tehran, the plan would collapse immediately. Missiles would launch, radar would track every movement, and the entire operation would be over before it even began. So the first step wasn't dropping bombs. It was blinding the sky. According to military analysts, modern air operations almost always begin with something called suppression of air defenses. The idea is simple. If the enemy can't see you, they can't stop you. And that's exactly what planners focused on. Before the main strike aircraft ever approached Tehran, other systems were likely already moving into position. Electronic warfare platforms, surveillance drones, and long-range missiles designed specifically to target radar systems. These systems don't necessarily destroy everything. Sometimes they do something even more effective. They confuse it. Electronic warfare can jam radar signals, feed false data into detection systems, or create phantom aircraft on radar screens. Suddenly, air defense operators don't know what's real and what isn't. Is that radar contact a fighter jet, a drone, or just electronic noise? That hesitation can buy a few critical minutes. And in a mission like this, a few minutes is all you need. Military experts believe the strike package likely approached Iran from multiple directions. Not because it looked dramatic, but because it made tracking much harder. Air defense systems work best when threats come from one direction. But if several objects appear across the radar network at once, the system becomes overloaded. Targets multiply, decisions slow down, confusion spreads. Meanwhile, the real strike aircraft continue moving closer. By the time radar operators realize which signals are real, it may already be too late. And that's the terrifying reality of modern warfare. Most of the battle doesn't happen with explosions. It happens with information, signals, Sensors, algorithms deciding which threat matters most. Some analysts later described this phase of the operation as a digital battlefield, where the first objective wasn't destroying buildings. It was temporarily shutting down Iran's ability to understand what was happening in its own airspace. And if that moment of confusion could be created, then the final phase could begin. Because once the skies above Tehran were effectively blinded, even for a short window, the strike aircraft would have exactly the opening they needed. Just enough time to reach the target area. Just enough time to release their payload. And just enough time to trigger the 60 seconds that would change everything. But the most shocking part of the story isn't the technology. It's what happened when those bombs finally reached the ground. Because when the dust settled in Tehran, the impact wasn't just military. It was political, strategic, and global. And that's when the world started asking a very uncomfortable question. What happens when an entire leadership structure can be targeted this precisely? So here's where things get really wild. The bombs hit, not at night, not in secret, but in broad daylight, right in the heart of Tehran. And the effect was instantaneous. The city's most secure complex, the offices of the supreme leader, the presidential palace, and the intelligence hub, was obliterated in just 60 seconds. Yeah, you heard that right. 1 minute. That's all it took to wipe out a leadership structure that had ruled Iran for decades. Reports suggest that the supreme leader himself, along with nearly 50 top officials, from generals to ministers, were taken out in that single, precise strike. And this wasn't some Hollywood exaggeration. It's confirmed through multiple intelligence channels. Now imagine what that does to a country's internal structure. Suddenly, the top of the chain of command is gone. Communication lines are shredded. Decision-making is paralyzed. Half of Tehran's power grid and communications networks go offline. Even Iran's ability to track its own nuclear material becomes compromised. According to intelligence reports, over 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough to make multiple nuclear warheads, became essentially unaccounted for. That's a nightmare scenario for global security. And it doesn't stop there. As the dust settled, there was another unexpected twist: the reaction of the people. Footage circulated online showing ordinary citizens witnessing the destruction. Some were terrified, others strangely relieved. Decades of oppression, surveillance, and brutal crackdowns had created a deep well of resentment. For many, seeing the leadership taken out was a shocking, almost cathartic moment. It's a reminder that the power of a government isn't just in its weapons, it's in the perception of its people. Meanwhile, Washington and Tel Aviv weren't celebrating quietly. The official statement from the US made it clear the operation wasn't just about removing leaders. It was about eliminating Iran's immediate military capabilities, destroying ballistic missiles, crippling naval forces, and putting a stop to any nuclear ambitions. At the same time, they extended an open hand, claiming they were willing to negotiate with whoever could step up to rebuild a functioning leadership in Tehran. But here's the kicker: the power vacuum created by this strike is massive. With the top officials gone and the chain of command shattered, anyone with access to weapons, uranium, or strategic infrastructure could act independently. That's the kind of uncertainty that keeps intelligence agencies and global leaders awake at night. It's a scenario with no clear map, no easy answers. So after 60 seconds of bombs and chaos, the real battle isn't just military. It's political, social, and strategic. The entire region is recalibrating. Allies, adversaries, and even ordinary citizens are suddenly dealing with a new reality. A nation's leadership can be removed in an instant, but what happens next? And that's the million-dollar question. How does a country survive the sudden collapse of its top power structure? Who fills the void? And can the global community control the fallout? Or has the clock just been reset on a completely unpredictable Middle East? This isn't just history in the making. It's a story that's still unfolding, and the consequences will echo far beyond Tehran.